This is exciting, isn't it?
Here we go, guys, in 5, 4, 3.
Here we go.
It's time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Thank you for the good programming, and I appreciate the content and really enjoy every moment.
It's a privilege to have you on your station and listen. It's good stuff. It's very educational.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Hope you had a great weekend. I had a lovely weekend. Thank you very much. It was delightful. Okay, well, enough stalling, Joan. Get back at it. All righty. Man, oh man, things are really ramping up again. A lot of people that I've been reading their commentary over the weekend, there is a lot of fear. Trump doesn't know how to get out of this war with Iran. And it looks like University of Chicago Professor Robert Pape is right. Can't figure out how to get out of it. So we just keep escalating what we're doing. We keep trying to do something to bring this to a conclusion, and we keep being unsuccessful. So what do? We're raising the stakes. Iran is now saying that there is no memorandum of understanding. They are in a full-scale war. However, according to the reports that I've read this morning, they are also still saying that the door is open. Door's open to talk. But right now, this is war. Full-fledged, full-throttled war. And remember how I was talking to you about the other strait in the region, Bab el-Mandab? That's the strait off the coast of Yemen. And how the fear was, or the report was, that Iran was telling the Houthis, hey, you know what? You really want to help us out? You want to do us a solid? We've supported you in your rebellion. Close Bab el-Mandab. And that's apparently what they are trying to do, which means Saudi Arabia and other countries now have two places that their ships are in danger, meaning that most everybody is going to have to go all the way around Africa. It's not that they can't do it. It takes longer because it's a longer route. It means that those tankers are going to cost more. So get ready. You know, there may come a time in the very near future where we look back on $4 a gallon gas fondly. Oh, the good old days. Remember when it was only $4 a gallon? Yeah. Apparently, we've identified the two soldiers who've been killed. There are reports that there might be a third, because apparently Iran targeted the places where they were sleeping. Mm-hmm. Yep. The missiles fell in the part of the base where everybody was sleeping. And Donald Trump, though he has caused this resurgence, is now, over the weekend, he was like, oh, we're going to rain down hell. What does that mean? Rain down hell? Some people were really terrified that Donald Trump was being urged to drop a nuke. Let's hope the military keeps us from something that absurd when we have a president who is clearly mentally impaired. You know, I was reading over the weekend when Richard Nixon was still in the presidency but saw that his days were numbered. He apparently started drinking very heavily and was pretty much always drunk. Remember those stories about how he would walk down the halls and look at the presidential portraits and talk to the other presidents? Because he was drunk all the time as he faced the end of his political career, two of the secretaries, I believe it was Secretary of State and maybe Secretary of Defense, they took the nuclear football away from Nixon. I don't know how they did it or if they even told him. I mean, if he was drunk all the time. But is anybody going to do that? Who's going to do that? Is Pete Hegseth going to do that? Is J.D. Vance going to do that? Marco Rubio going to do that? Yeah, I didn't think so. Don't hold your breath. Oh, this is just a couple of court cases that I wanted to bring you up to date on before we go back to what's going on in Trump land. Remember how he is taking a bunch of New York Times reporters to court, or trying to, because they broke the story that when he was leaving the NATO meeting, he didn't fly in his fancy Qatari jet. He flew in an old Air Force One plane. And they reported that the reason was because the Qatari jet didn't have the same capabilities. The implication being that Air Force One is equipped with whatever it needs to shoot down missiles that may be fired at the plane. Didn't have strong defensive capabilities or any defensive capabilities. And Donald Trump told that lie about, oh, yeah, it's such a great plane. I decided to send it to a couple of air bases in Europe so everybody can admire my plane. Well, the White House is now admitting that the new plane is going to be taken out of service because it's going to have an upgrade in its defensive capabilities, or as Donald Trump put it, they're going to take it out of service so it can be maxed out. So he was going after the New York Times reporters, partly because he doesn't like anybody talking to anybody without his approval, but also partly because he was saying, that's not true. That's not true. It wasn't a security risk, my new bright and shiny plane. But apparently it was. And now he's saying so himself. Yeah, they want to fix it up. So I wonder what that will do to the lawsuit. We shall see. Oh, and one other court thing that I wanted to tell you about before we get back to the craziness that is Donald Trump. Guess what? Guess what, David Ellison? Guess what, David Ellison? You're not going to close that Warner Brothers Discovery deal. At least not right away. A judge said, no, wait a minute. No, there's been a challenge. States attorneys general, among others, have challenged this. So for the next 2 weeks, you do not close this deal. This deal cannot be closed. And then in 2 weeks, the judge may rule on whether or not the merger should stay shut down, while these court challenges work their way through the courts. So we're going to stop it for now. There's a restraining order for now. The companies involved cannot close this deal. And then the court is going to consider whether or not this deal should be held in abeyance while all the court challenges work their way through the legal system. Okay, here's why that might be a bigger deal than it seems on the surface. David Ellison signed this deal he signed to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, has some kind of penalty clause. If the deal doesn't close by, I think it's like the end of September, beginning of October, but if the deal doesn't close by a certain date, all the owners of the Warner Brothers Discovery stock start getting a daily payment from Paramount. And because there are so many of them, the speculation is this could be hundreds of millions of dollars a month. And why is that important? Because David Ellison is already, just with the Paramount deal, up to his neck in debt. And he was hoping the Warner Brothers Discovery deal would go through. He'd have his little monopoly, but the debt would be even greater. If he has to pay those kinds of penalty fees, he can't afford to go forward with this deal. It will literally bring his entire financial house of cards down if he has to start paying out hundreds of millions of dollars every month. And you know, we always talk about legal time. You know how legal time isn't the same as normal people time? Legal time, for every minute of normal people time, that's the equivalent of, probably 20 normal minutes for 1 minute of lawyer time. 20 to 1, I'd say. In other words, between the continuances, the appeals, we need these documents, we need more time for this judge, we need more time for that. The state's attorneys general, that's not the only case they're facing. There's at least the Writers Guild has also filed suit against this merger, and a citizens group has filed suit against the merger. Whether or not any of these suits win, the people behind these lawsuits realize, first of all, they want to win. They want this merger to stop because it's no good for anybody except David Ellison and his daddy. But if they can drag this legal process out long enough, David Ellison may very well just have to walk away from this deal. Nobody, except for David Ellison and his daddy, Larry, they're the only two people that seem to really want this deal to go through. They're itching to get their hands, first of all, on CNN, because, you know, they owe Trump. You know, supposedly David Ellison has already had conversations with the White House about potential changes to CNN. Whew. So, David's deal is off for 2 weeks, and let us light a candle to whatever deity you believe in, and let's hope that the judge rules that this restraining order has to be in place until these court challenges are settled. You know, it seems logical to me. I mean, if you're considering this a valid challenge to a merger, what, you're going to let the merger go through, knowing full well that this case could be in the courts for a year or more? And like 2 years from now, if they win, you know, it will be almost an empty victory. If David Ellison is allowed to complete this merger, everything will be changed. Everything will be altered in probably in a way that it cannot be put back. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. So, a little bit of a victory there. Woohoo! Are you happy? Hey, here's an idea. Let's talk about Iran again. Yeah. I really appreciate the text that came in. Why can't Trump just stop bombing Iran? Wouldn't Iran get the message? Heck, have your intermediaries make that offer. Hey, we'll stop bombing. You stop bombing. Let's go back to where we were before. What do you say? Come on, what do you say? And during the ceasefire, I was reading this. During the ceasefire, when Donald Trump said, "Oh, okay, you can sell your oil again. We'll take those sanctions off and everything." And it is believed that in that ceasefire window, Iran netted billions with a B in profits by selling its oil in that window of the ceasefire. And so it has plenty of money to build more drones. Woo! More drones. Good grief. I mean, seriously, we are doing this to ourselves. Senator Mark Warner, who's a Democrat from Virginia, he's on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He was on ABC this week, Sunday, talking to Jonathan Karl. He was talking about this whole mess. Listen to Senator Mark Warner.
As a member of the Gang of Eight, there was no imminent threat from Iran against America. So Donald Trump chose to go to war. It took him 2 weeks to lay out what he thought his goals were going to be. Let's go through those. Regime change, how are we doing there? We got a worse crowd than before. Getting the enriched uranium, well, it's still there. Matter of fact, it would take a minimum of 15,000 troops on the ground for a week to try to take these canisters, which are quite volatile, out of their bunkers. Getting rid of Iran's missile and drone capability. Obviously, we've not been successful there. And the thing, John, that makes me completely crazy is Iran has both missiles and they also have lots and lots of $50,000 drones that are very effective. We are using missiles that cost $2.5 million to shoot down those drones. President Zelensky, the only country that has devised a technique of counter-Iranian drones, at $5,000, they've done it so effectively. They offered us all of that technology for free, and the Trump White House basically said to the Ukrainians, thanks, but no thanks. So we're behind on that as well. And then finally, on the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, I don't know what gas station the secretary is going to, but before the war, average price of gasoline in Virginia was $2.81. It is now back to $4. Diesel's at $5. I see no path in the short term how the strait is going to be settled. This war of choice has been a disaster. It has been a disaster militarily. It has been a disaster in terms of how we're viewed around the world. It has been a disaster to our friends and the allies who question whether we will keep our promises. I'm anxious, if it takes a classic Donald Trump move, declare victory tomorrow and be done. But the continuation of this war at this pace will be a continuing disaster.
And let us not forget that this isn't just a waste of money on munitions. It is a waste of lives. I appreciate that young people, especially who join the military, they want to serve their country, they want to better themselves, and they are willing to lay down their lives. But as a parent, if you find out that you've lost a child, one of your family members, for this what? This war that was started by Trump's ego and can't be concluded because of his incompetence? Is that something you're willing to sacrifice one of your children for? I don't think so. Over the weekend, again, on MS Now with Alex Witt, Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, she's a Democrat from New Mexico, she talked about the lives, the cost of this war in human life. Listen to Representative Melanie Stansbury.
I think this is just absolutely devastating to lose service members in the line of duty. It just breaks my heart, especially coming from a family of veterans. I mean, it's just tragic. And I think it just reinforces the reality that the United States should never have been pulled into this conflict to begin with, and that Donald Trump is waging an illegal war that is costing the lives of our service members, thousands of civilians across the Middle East, and billions in taxpayer dollars. And he is currently asking Congress for more money, and we need to tell him no, absolutely not. We have already passed multiple war powers resolutions to stop this war, and it needs to stop.
What options does the president have remaining? Is there any way to prevent a wider escalation?
I mean, like I said, I think that the United States should have never gotten involved in this conflict to begin with. In fact, we know that the president was advised by his own national intelligence advisors and others to not get involved in this war. There were no clear objectives from the beginning. And over the last several months, we have seen a president that has flailed to even outline objectives for how to bring the conflict he did start to a close. But it is absolutely imperative that Congress step in, that my colleagues across the aisle who have been too weak to actually stand up to the president step in at this moment and to advise him to pull back, to stop this war, to remove our troops, and to stop the escalation of violence in the Middle East.
And in addition, to the two people that I reported to you have been officially identified as killed in this war, killed in Jordan when Iran sent missiles to where they were sleeping. Well, the government is now confirming that there is a third military death, this one from northern Iraq. Apparently, a downed drone exploded, killing another service person. We are going to take your calls and read your texts. 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. I will be reading your texts, taking your calls. We are going to continue to talk about the news of the day with you. Hey, if you've never called in before and today you're feeling like that first-time caller vibe, remember the number this way, 773-763-WCPT. That's easier than trying to remember all those numbers. And I hope you will join our discussion today. We're going to be right back after a break.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
It is Monday. We are Monday through Thursday. We spend the first hour of the show talking to you about the news of the day, reading your texts, taking your calls. This text came in. Again, the grifter in chief made a fool of himself. The world saw a person that only cares about himself instead of taking care of matters that can help the country. Instead, he wastes more taxpayer money on his useless whims. Meanwhile, gas prices are going higher, as is inflation, and the Epstein class is protected by the grand old pedophiles. Kind of feels that way, doesn't it? Very, very much so. Let's go to the phone lines. Our good friend Jim's on the line from Chicago. Hello, Jim. How are you today?
Hi, Joan. Another fleeting story in the news. A three-judge panel is tinkering with the mail-in votes. And it reminds me of what the Peter Thiel creation said a couple of weeks ago about Nixon's circumstance. He said, that wouldn't have lasted 12 hours in this atmosphere, and I have a tendency to believe him because that seems to be the truth. But the three-judge panel, I don't know what they're going to do with the mail-in votes, but it didn't sound good. But I don't know. I haven't heard it. They haven't picked it up since then. The other thing is Trump, Mr. Goldfinger himself, said AI is like liquid gold. It's liquid gold. In the meantime, everybody is up in arms about it. Even it's a nonpartisan issue because we realize that the climate is getting hotter. We're smoke inhalated. We're God knows what. And these AI plants are using up all the water. I don't want to go into the whole histrionics of it, but the point is, people got to think they got to put the brakes on it. The governor of New York is going to put the brakes on it because we don't even know what it'll do eventually. You know, if it uses all this energy and all the water, and little jobs are created by these things, but the point is, where's the beef, Joan? Where's the beef?
Well, there's the $64,000 question.
Yeah, where's the beef? I mean, I don't know. I've had two circumstances where, I mean, I make a couple of checks calls, and AI has made it 5 times. It's made it another 2-3 minutes longer.
Sure.
And I've heard doctors complain about AI, saying that they could get the information of the patient quicker than this AI. Then they've got to deal with this AI. So I've got to. I mean, I don't know what to say about it. But I hope that what have we got? About 100 days left. I know we'll get the House back unless
I stopped counting. I stopped counting. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it anymore. It's basically.
I don't blame you. You got enough to think about.
It's basically 3 months and change.
No, I know. Anyway, Joan, and this war is. Think of it. That the representative is right. Think of all the innocent people dying in this war and these wars.
It is, and it is heartbreaking because he doesn't care about them. He doesn't care about them. They literally mean nothing to him.
Well, didn't he demonstrate it during the pandemic when the reporter asked him about the pandemic in February, and he never breathed a word of it? Now, this guy's supposed to be for the welfare of the United States, and he let it go for a good month before he opened his mouth. And, you know,
our COVID numbers would be better if we just stopped testing. Tell them to just stop testing. Then our COVID numbers will be great.
Yeah, he has a great regard for the human, the citizen, any human being. Anyway, Joan, have a good show this week. Thank you, Joan.
Thanks,
very
Jim.
much.
Thanks so much for the call. A couple other things. As our good friend William Campbell predicted, Andy Burnham has become the new UK Prime Minister. And he seems to be, at least so far, a very popular guy. Of course, we said that about Keir Starmer, too. He plans, but it sounds like this guy is a little more in tune with the people of the country, because basically, he didn't use these words, but basically he's going to focus on kitchen table issues. And there's never been a politician that's gone wrong by doing that, by focusing on kitchen table issues. Got another text that came in. And where is Mitch McConnell? This is fascinating that the GOP may be faking that he's still alive. Joan, this is unprecedented. I know. And here's the thing. You know, he supposedly in this release, he just had a fall and a little bit of pneumonia. And then they were running all kinds of tests to see if they can figure out why he had the fall. Okay, I realize that older people, particularly someone who's had polio, are more frail, more fragile. But under what circumstances would you keep someone in the hospital just to run a few more tests? They can't do that on an outpatient basis. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It really, really doesn't. That's the thing. How many of old people, how many of our grandparents or maybe parents have had a fall, even when they break a bone. Yes, they might go into the hospital and have surgery, but be in the hospital for what's coming up on a month and a half when he didn't break any bones, at least according to what's been released. He didn't break any bones. He just, kind of passed out, fell down, and might have a touch of pneumonia. Okay. Hospitals are great places, but they're not a place that you want an elderly person to spend a lot of time if you don't have to have them there, because even though every effort is made to keep them squeaky clean, hospitals are sources of infection. If you stay in the hospital long enough, and especially if you're elderly and you're immune compromised, the risk of getting a hospital-acquired infection is too high to risk keeping someone who's just there so they can run a couple of tests. It doesn't make any sense. And Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, has said that 2 different agencies, he didn't name them, have reached out to him to say that Mitch McConnell isn't alive or he's a vegetable on life support. Where is Mitch McConnell? We want to know. We want to know. We want to know these things. Let's go to our good friend Ron, who's on the line in Chicago. Hello, Ron.
Hello. There's a picture of Mitch McConnell holding up a newspaper, and it says, Lindbergh crosses the Atlantic.
Oh, the Mitch McConnell and the Lindsey Graham jokes.
No, never stop. No. And the FDA, all last week, they were saying that the cause of the parasite was iceberg lettuce from Taylor Farms. And when it was found out that the owner of Taylor Farms is a big contributor to Trump's campaign fund, now they're backtracking. Well, we have to do more testing, and we're not really sure.
Yeah, they were saying it's a false positive.
Whatever that is, yeah.
Yeah.
And Kash Patel made a big announcement this morning that the FBI will no longer investigate any wrongdoing by the ICE agents. ICE is going to investigate itself.
Yeah, and that's why, at least till this point, ICE has been stalling the states when they want to investigate shootings and crimes, because it's our jurisdiction. So what's their argument going to be now? I guess that just means that they have to turn everything over to the states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that shooting in Maine, they already cleaned up the crime scene already. They didn't bother waiting for any state police or anybody else. They started. All right.
Well, Ron, thank you for the call.
Okay.
Appreciate that very much. And again, about Mitch McConnell, somebody texted in, could Governor Beshear visit Senator McConnell since he's in rehab, so they say? Well, I don't see why not. I certainly think that he should. Let's go to Dave, who's on the line from Hoffman Estates. Hello, Dave.
Hey, Joan. On McConnell, why doesn't the governor send somebody down to the morgue at the hospital?
Yeah. Some people are saying that Andy Beshear should just say, the photograph that was released is insufficient proof of life, and we only have till August 3rd to call for a special election. So I'm calling for a special election right now. And if Mitch McConnell is alive, then he can, he can get in touch with me. He can make a public statement. There can be a video released. But I'm going to call for a special election. That's what, if the positions were reversed, you don't think Republicans would play hardball? You don't think they would say, well, we don't know. We don't have any evidence that he's alive, so we're going to call for a special election. And then, they have a choice. They can either show that Mitch McConnell really is up and around, or they can agree to a special election.
Yeah. And all they're doing is they're just playing four corners with the Democrats. And see if this sounds familiar. This goes back about 36 years ago. That Terry Schiavo case.
Oh, God, yeah.
Where she was resuscitated by having a severe, brain damage due to oxygen deprivation and was left comatose.
That ended up in the courts. There was a big fight over whether or not she should be removed from life support.
Right. The husband wanted it, the tube pulled out, and the parents wanted it kept in, and they went to like 4 or 5 times, fighting it, and finally they pulled it out. What is it? 15 years they fought that one. So they're playing. Every day is one day closer to August 4. So they. Bashir better,
That's why Bashir has to do something now. And you know what? If Mitch McConnell walks out the front doors of the hospital and says, nanny, 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 then Andy Bashir says, I'm okay. We're gonna pull everything. We're not going to have that special election. Thank you so much, Senator McConnell, for letting the world know that you're okay. Bing, walk away from it.
And on that, over in Jordan, I'm just reading where it said U.S. Central Command originally noted that a third U.S. service member was missing. However, CENTCOM announced today that after thorough search, U.S. military personnel found unidentified remains at the location earlier today. The examination is in process to verify, but right now they're saying that there's 18 KIA and, like 415 that have been wounded since this Iran war.
Well, you're right. There was somebody listed as missing. And when I heard that, I thought, well, I was praying, maybe he was in the other room and they just didn't see him, so they didn't count him. But that's if they have found unidentified remains. That certainly seems...
Yeah, in that area. And they keep a DNA file on all of the troops now. But now
and then, of course, we've got the new guy, a new person who just got... they announced his death in northern Iraq, too. So,
Right. Yeah, that one, I don't know what they'd find of him if he was next to, but boots and that. But and in Iran, where he wants to keep bombing them. And these guys, these IRGC, they've had how many years? They tunneled into the mountains. And you seem to recall, in Vietnam, they were tunneled under, and they had who Curtis LeMay wanted to bomb them to the Stone Age. We lost that war. They couldn't bomb them all.
And besides, Dave, we don't have to bomb them. You might not have heard this, but we've already destroyed their military. We've destroyed their ability to wage war. We've destroyed their Navy. So I don't really see any reason to keep... We've destroyed all their nuclear material and nuclear sites for processing. So I don't even understand why we're still there, because we've accomplished so much.
Yeah, I don't know, what are these things flying, and are they phantom?
Yeah.
But I mean, they're, like I said, and when they've been hitting, you haven't heard them really have taken out any of these IRGC people. Like I say, I think they're buried in the mountains, and they're just waiting for the Marines or whoever to come ashore. They're waiting for that.
Yeah, they do seem to be far more prepared than we ever gave them credit for.
Yep, he kept thinking it was Venezuela all over.
That's right. He got cocky. And Netanyahu told him how everybody would be so enamored of him, and how he would, if he wants that Nobel Peace Prize, this is the way to get it. Drop a couple of bombs, the people will rise up, there'll be a democratic Iran, and you, my friend, will walk away a hero.
Hey, he might even have a chance to lose 2 times to the same country, like Germany did. Anyway, let me clear off.
Okay, Dave.
But thank you, Joan.
Thank you. We need to take a break. 773-763-9278. I am reading your texts and taking your calls. More after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We are taking your calls and reading your texts. Got a couple more texts about McConnell. McConnell may being deceased. How crazy and inhumane is it that this is how they treat an elder, esteemed statesman? Okay. Somebody else texted in. This is from Lois. Mitch M. doesn't look like he's in a hospital. No IVs or monitors and in street clothes. If he's healthy enough to sit up in bed and read a paper, he should be able to have visitors, like the governor, come and talk to him. Makes sense to me, Lois. Let's go to the phone lines. Our friend Paul is on the line from Seattle. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Hi, Joan. The fires, the smoke that you're getting there in the upper Midwest from the fires in northern Canada, in the Northwest Territories, and I have to say, I heard somebody on Tom Hartman's show just a half hour ago. He's upset about the fires because they're affecting summer youth sports in Wisconsin. I thought, this guy.
Oh, and he also wants Canada to pay for any damage the fires have caused. He's going to send them a bill.
Yeah, and they better get their. Well, as a matter of fact, there were 4 U.S. Congress representatives in Congress from Michigan, being Lisa McClain, John James, who's running for governor in Michigan, and the carpetbagger of all time, Jack Bergman, who is representative in the 1st District, who actually lives in Louisiana. He listed as his residence in Michigan, corrugated steel shed that stores his boat that he takes on Lake Superior. That was his residence. He has no permanent residence in Michigan. But I guess the 1st District, Michigan, they don't care as long as you have a right-wing idiot. But the thing is, the Northwest Territories, I don't think people get it. It's so far away. First of all, it's 1,800 miles north of where you are. It's 1,500 miles north of here. It is more than 520,000 square miles. That's about 6 times the size of the state of Illinois. And nobody lives there. It's all forest land. There are 45,000 people living in the Northwest Territories, which is over 500,000 square miles. It's got the density as if 45,000 people living in that is less than one person for every 10 square miles, which is like 200 people living in the city of Chicago. There's nobody there. There are no roads. And this is the right wing has been saying, forest management. You can't manage. There's not enough forest industry in the entire world to manage 500,000 square miles of forest land. There aren't even any roads up there. If you want to go, people talk, the right wing, they talk about how they know everything because they're all hunters and fishers and they know everything about the outdoors. Well, if you want to go fishing in the Northwest Territories, you have to charter a plane and go fly into the lake that you want to fish on. Great fishing, but they bring all your gear on the plane, your tent and everything, and you stay there until they come and get you. They fly in, they land on a seaplane that land on the lake, and they unload you. There's no roads to get in there. There's no way to manage it. And this meme of forest management came from the timber industry out.
Did he drop, Paul? Paul, I don't hear Paul anymore.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there he is. Paul, you dropped out. You were talking about the last thing I heard was the forestry industry.
Yeah, well, it was during the spotted owl controversy back in the early 90s when all this harvesting of forest lands was endangering the spotted owl, and George H.W. Bush says that people are more important than owls and all this, and he got a lot of, but they've been saying that they want every forest to be like a managed forest, like Weyerhaeuser has out here. They have a lot of forest land that they farm, basically. You can't farm that much forest land. These are natural forests. This is God's country. This is where natural, but the problem is 1,800 miles north of where you are, it's been over 100 degrees up there within the last 5 years. 100 degrees, their normal highs in the summer should be about 75 degrees at the most, 75, upper 70s maybe. It's been over 100 degrees. There's a great article it's an online magazine in Michigan. It's called Bridge Michigan. An article, I heard this woman interviewed on a Detroit radio station. Her name is Kelly House, and she talks about all of the important facts. I was very her interview and what she mentioned in Bridge, Michigan, and she was responding to the Republican this letter to Mark Carney saying, either get your Forest Management Act together or else. You know, it was a typical Trump-style type of Trump MAGA letter, or else. And it's like he was talking about all this, that there's just, it's so huge. And by the way, these fires, they don't ever go out. They burn year-round. It's just in the summertime when it gets hot up there again that they start really raging. But there's no way to put them out. And if we don't get our act together in terms of climate change, people have got to understand this. And we get this every year. We don't have it so bad this year because a lot of our nearby forests, those fires have burned out. They're done. But I know people are like, oh, all this smoke is it's a real pain. Yeah, well, you ought to try living in the area where the fire is. You can't go over here because the roads are closed. We were just over in eastern Washington, over the forest. Chelan County is evacuating because of the fires there. People have to evacuate the whole county. And it's like, if a little smoke ought to be, I know people are irritated because it's affecting youth sports in Wisconsin. And that's really unfair. Yeah, well, you wait till it starts affecting your life like it is in the West often. And it's been about the past 25 years, as I say, they used to have a meme here. Is they got sick of people from California moving up here. And as I say, Seattle moved about 300 miles north, about 20 years ago, because now we have Northern California weather. It's been normal this year. It's been like an old style Seattle summer. I think our highs have mostly been about 75 in the mid to upper 70s. A few days we had 85, but only a couple. We haven't had 90 degrees this year. It's been relativly normal. But
maybe that's because, like Trump said, somebody got in there and what was it he said, that the forest should be swept, and if only we could sweep the forests, that we'd never have fires. Yeah. So maybe there was a whole group of people that got out there and started sweeping those forest floors.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think they're mostly a lot of our nearby fires that are basically burned out because they've been burning for the last 5, 6, 8 years. All of the fuel is gone. The last couple of years, the pass over the Cascade Mountains, Highway 2, the U.S. Highway 2, Stevens Passes was closed for fires because of burning stuff onto the road. It's like that's different than the smoke. We've had smoke here on the ground. I mean, where you wake up and there's smoke on the ground. And so if it's really hot, normally, we don't have air conditioning like you do back there. Most people don't. So what we do is at night or in the evening, we open our windows and then we turn on the fans and bring in the cool air and pump out the stagnant air from the day. But if it's smoky outside, you can't do that because you're just sucking in a bunch of smoke. Well, smoky air into your house. So you can't do that. We haven't had that much this year, not in this area. But like I said, it is so vast. There's no cleaning it up or raking out the forest. Look at what 500,000 square miles looks like.
Yeah.
Check out it's three times. Northwest Territories is essentially 3 times the size
the weird
of the state
thing
of California.
With Donald Trump, if the wildfires were in the United States and the smoke was going to Canada, he would probably want to charge them for the smoke because, that would be valuable smoke that we were sending their way, and we were sending it for free. So they should probably pay for that too. Paul, I got to get to the news, but thank you. It is always good to chat with you. Appreciate your call. We are going to be back with more right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Jameson Firestone moved to Moscow, Russia, shortly before the fall of the Soviet Union. That was like 1991. Founded the law firm Firestone Duncan, then fled Russia in August 2009 following the arrest of his employee, Sergei Magnitsky, who died in prison after 11 months of incarceration without a trial. Jamison Firestone has written a memoir, Rule of Lies, My Wild Ride Through Chaos, Corruption, and Murder in Putin's Russia. Jamison, thank you so much for being here. What a story. Tell me what the...
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yes, welcome. It's great to have you here. You really, as they say, quite cliche, you had a ringside seat for a lot of really important history that unfolded. Let's start from the beginning. Why did you move to Russia?
Well, I had a not exactly normal, upbringing in the States. My father was a convicted criminal, a fraudster, and while awaiting his trial, he went a little crazy, started doing drugs, and eventually bought New York's most expensive brothel, which he filled both with prostitutes and mafiosi. So I kind of grew up in my high school years, surrounded in this criminal environment, and also talking to these mafiosi who had plans for me, like how to get me into business, how to be their front, none of which, of course, I wanted to do. And so I became kind of expert on saying no to people who you can't normally say no to, right? Who aren't used to taking no for an answer, but kind of showing them respect, making them laugh, often making them think I'm useless and not worth the time of day, but being able to get out of things. And so when I went to law school, the Soviet Union started to fall apart or to open up. And it was this kind of new land of opportunity. McDonald's was going over there. I read an article about all the opportunity over there. And interestingly enough, my dad had forced me to study Russian when I was in high school.
As one does.
And so as one does, right? No, he thought the Soviet Union would fall apart and I would go there and make money, which I thought was ridiculous, but he was paying. And so I just thought when I was graduating, why not, right? I mean, I've got nowhere else to go. So I got on the first plane right after taking the bar exam and landed in Moscow ready to do business. And that's when the hardliners kidnapped Gorbachev, rolled the tanks in and said the revolution is over, the reforms are over, and there isn't going to be any business. So at first I thought I had really made quite a mistake.
Tell me about your partner, Sergei.
Yeah. Okay. So once I got to Russia and I got the law firm up and running, there were some pretty crazy years. But we hired this guy named Sergei Magnitsky, and he was an auditor and a tax specialist. And I had this law firm that I started with. I mean, it was two guys and a few $1,000s in a computer, but within 10 years, it was this pretty sizable firm. And Russia started doing really well in the early 2000s. All these people started pouring into Russia, trying to invest in things. And I got this idea. It was like, why don't I help all these big investors who are coming in to buy Russian stocks and hold them? Why don't I kind of become their backroom office? And I needed a guy who could figure out like all the tax stuff in the background and calculate what they owe and when they had to pay. And that was Sergei. And so this little backroom operation that I set up ended up managing about $3.5 million worth of other people's investments. And Sergei was running that whole show. And the craziest thing happened to us because we had one client, his name was Bill Browder. And Bill Browder was the largest foreign investor in Russia. And we were managing his companies for him while he bought and sold his shares. We were just in the back room like admin, right? Like how much tax you have to pay when you sell something or whatever. And one day, our offices are raided by 35 plainclothes policemen with a search warrant to take basically company documents for companies that have paid a lot of tax. It's a head scratcher, right? Like most people would say,
you would think
you'd be looking for companies.
Yeah, the ones that don't pay the tax. But call me crazy. Never mind. I don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Right. No. Exactly. So that's what we were thinking. So we tried to, something didn't seem right. We asked them a lot of questions. They beat up one of my lawyers who asked too many questions. That guy went to the hospital for 3 weeks. And then they ripped apart, we didn't have any questions anymore after they beat him up. They ripped apart my office and they took all these documents for companies that had paid a lot of tax. And we spent a lot of time arguing with the police afterwards, as lawyers do, saying, what did you do? Why did you do that? Give us our stuff back. And in the middle of those arguments, which went on for months, we got a call from a court bailiff, the guy in the court who's making an order in the court, right? But in Russia, the court bailiff has a second function, and that's to collect debts. So if somebody loses money in court, the bailiff has to collect it. And this bailiff calls up and says, so you've just lost about $1 billion in court today. And we're like, exactly right. And the only thing worse than having a client lose about $1 billion is not knowing that there was a court case going on, right? The whole thing went on without him knowing, without us knowing. And so we were like, how can that be, right? And so Sergey did some digging, and he found out what happened was the police who raided our offices and took those documents, they only did that because they wanted to use that to change the owners of 3 companies that had paid a lot of tax. And they changed the owners. They took my client, Hermitage Capital, off the ownership documents, and they had put on some convicted killers.
Oh,
I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right?
good God.
And then once the convicted killers were in control, they hired their own lawyers. And then these guys who arranged the theft, they sued our companies for $1 billion. And our new lawyers hired by the convicted killers pleaded guilty. And so the judge rules, you owe $1 billion. And we're like, okay, the good thing here is we had just sold everything. We had just paid all the taxes. There was nothing left to steal. So we kind of thought we had the last laugh. And then we found out that we didn't have the last laugh, that the whole thing was a ploy. What they did was, imagine this: if you have $1 billion profit, which is what these companies had, and you sue them for $1 billion, it evens out at zero, right? So those fake lawsuits evened out our taxable profits at zero. And because they now controlled the companies, they went to their own version of the IRS and they asked for a tax refund of $250 million our client had paid when he ran those companies. So they ripped off their own government. It was just a whole ploy to steal taxes from their own government. And that's what Sergey discovered, that there was this criminal group that had robbed $250 million.
So it was a criminal group. Was it a criminal group that was sanctioned or part of the government, or just like a criminal organization on its own?
So it's a really great question. And I think the best answer I can give you to that is I think it was on its own until what happened next. So I think that this was kind of an opportunistic group that was stealing, and I don't know if the government knew about it or not, but Sergey reported them, and as soon as he reported them, we thought if you report, if somebody stole, $1 billion, $250 million from the IRS and turned in the people who did it, he'd be like a national hero, right? Mm-hmm. But turned out when Sergey turned them in, everybody was in on it. And so unfortunately, the people he had testified against had him arrested. He was held in prison for 11 months. They kept telling him, you've got to change your testimony. You've got to blame your client, but, stop blaming the people who did it. And he refused to do that. And at the end of 11 months, they killed him. And so when, it was horrible. And when they killed him, my client, who had been working for this very wealthy hedge fund manager, kind of pulled a Bruce Wayne. He hung up his business and he said, now I'm no longer in the hedge fund business. We're all going to chase the guys who did this to Sergey. So anybody who was a financial analyst for me is now just tracing the money to the crooks. Anybody who was a lawyer for me is filing criminal complaints against them. And so we started to chase them. And one of the things we did when we found that we couldn't get any justice in Russia because it was too corrupt was we created sanctions here in the United States, to say that the people who did this could no longer travel to the United States and we could freeze all their money. And as soon as we did that, the government got involved on the side of the criminals. Because, Putin
The Russian
want
government,
people...
I take it, not our government.
Yeah, the Russian government. And the Russian government, basically, the idea that somebody was going to punish Russian officials by taking away their travel privileges and freezing their money was so awful to President Putin that the Russian government at that point got involved and did everything possible to try and stop the sanctions.
Weren't you afraid to pursue this after you saw what happened to Sergei? I mean, why didn't you just say, you know what? This is not working for me. I'm sorry. I'm going to pack my suitcase and I'm getting out of here.
Yeah, the problem is they killed Sergei. I was responsible for him. I was my boss, and so I was his boss. And so Bill and I kind of pulled a dirty Harry. I mean, look, normally when the Russian police go after people, they do exactly that, right? They pack up and they go and they give up. But we weren't your normal people. I mean, we were a bunch of pissed off lawyers and accountants, and we were very well funded. And so we just did something unexpected and started chasing them. And so, I mean, the first way we started chasing them, we were actually, looking for, because when people steal, they buy stuff, right? So we were trying to see if they bought anything. And you've got these police officers making like $15,000 a year in Russia. And all of a sudden, their parents are buying like millions of dollars of property and a fleet of cars, right? And the police officers, of course, living in that. They're all flying around, and these guys aren't too bright, so they're posting their glamorous lives on the Russian equivalent of Facebook, right? So they've got these millionaire lives, but they've got official salaries of nothing. So we actually started making YouTube videos about that and blasting that to all of Russia while filing criminal complaints against them, trying to get some action. So it got pretty hairy, and we were pretty crazy. But at the end of the day, to answer your question, they killed somebody we cared about. We couldn't walk away.
Yeah, I understand that. So because of the time you were there and, doing your business, did you really get a sense of the rise of Vladimir Putin, or was he, because I know originally he was kind of a small player. He was just one of the crowd. Did you look at this guy going like, this guy's causing us trouble. This guy's going to be a problem for the whole world?
It's actually really funny. So I was Moscow based for 17 of my 18 years. But I did spend 1 year in St. Petersburg, and it was funny. It was 1996, and my closest friend in St. Petersburg was a 60-something-year-old openly gay American guy, wearing bow tie wearing, very proper, prim and proper, and he worked in the same office as Vladimir Putin. Putin was his boss. He had actually been given a position to promote foreign investment. So every day I was getting stories from Richard about Putin, and Richard actually liked Putin, but I didn't. I mean, the stories that Richard was telling me was really scaring me. I mean, Richard would say, every time a foreigner needed help and they went to Vladimir Putin, and everybody in St. Petersburg was like, oh yeah, Putin's the honest one. He never takes any bribes. But what Putin would do was sneakier than bribes. He would say, if you want the city to help you, you should give part of your business to the city. And he would get all these people to give their businesses or part of their businesses to the city. And then he was in charge of the city when it bought things from abroad. And so he would sign these huge contracts for like $100 million to buy stuff from abroad that was never delivered. And obviously, whoever got the money kept it, right? And so it's a lot smarter, rather than having somebody give you an envelope with $10,000 in it, right? Just have all of these businesses give pieces to the city and then take the city's money and send it to outer space, right? So I saw that in '96, and also where you really saw Putin becoming bad news was, remember, Putin wasn't really elected like a normal president. So in 1999. When Boris Yeltsin was a sick man, and when he had been pretty much caught at corruption, and when he wasn't going to win any more elections and knew he was going to go to jail, Boris Yeltsin did something crazy. He got on national television, 1999, New Year's to wish the country a happy new year. And then he resigned on national TV and made Putin acting president in exchange for a pardon. So Yeltsin just gave the whole country to Putin for a pardon.
Good God.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And then when Putin came in, Putin has a playbook. Now, here's Putin's playbook. See if you can imagine a president doing this. Putin took the most popular comedy show in Russia off the air. Putin weaponized the justice system. Putin went after the media. Putin went after the universities. And then Putin started this whole story that the country couldn't survive without him. I mean, I don't know if you can imagine a politician doing something like that, right?
Oh my God.
But that was the Putin playbook.
Oh my God. There's a researcher that I follow on social media, a psychologist, and today he posted a long thing about how democracies die and that they don't die from without, they die from within. And then he walked through exactly the steps you're talking about, how Trump took over the Republican Party. They thought they could make a deal with the devil. They thought they could control him. They thought they loved the fact that, he tapped into people's rage and if they could just manage it. And what they didn't realize was that he was taking control of them. And what you just said is almost verbatim what this researcher said this morning. But here, let me walk you through, how this all happens based on, there's a couple of researchers at Harvard who did a big analysis of how democracies die. And he said, let me tell you about that research. And it sounds exactly like what you are saying now. Unbelievable.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, look, the lesson I learned, because things in Russia were pretty good for a while under Putin. I mean, when Putin became president, it's not like he fixed something really big, but it just so happened the price of oil went up to the roof, and then hundreds of billions of dollars fell on Russia, and it became and people's lives improved. When people are making money, they don't think too much about democracy, right? When times are good, that's when it's easy to steal people's rights. It's only when and when you dismantle the system, and this is what worries me about Trump supporters. Look, their policies, right? So policies are like gun control and gay rights and abortion. And we vote on those things, right? People have differences of opinions and we vote. But there's the system that, honors the vote and makes everything work. And we've, for a long time in America, we've been dismantling the system. And even the Democrats are guilty of dismantling the system a bit, just not at the pace that Trump is, but people are forgetting that the system is what protects us. And if you bulldoze the system to get some short-term wins, you're going to be happy today, but that system, what's left, is going to turn on you, and there's going to be nothing to protect you. And that's what happened in Russia. People closed their eyes because times were good. They were getting what they wanted, and then when times got bad, there's no system there to protect them.
I read a book about totalitarianism, and they did a story with one woman who, and I can't remember the country, but it had been a democracy, then it went dictatorship, and the woman was like, I don't know. It's just, I woke up one day and there were tanks in the street. Like, how did we get here? It wasn't any big thing. I certainly didn't vote for this, but here we are. It sounds like what you're talking about. They've got it good, so they don't want to look too closely. But it also seems like with so many of it's like the death of 1,000 cuts. Oh, I'm sorry. That's just Absolutely. A tiny little cut. We're not going to pay attention to that. Oh, there's another one. Again, too small. It doesn't even need a Band-Aid. And on and on and on until you've bled to death.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's really about what happens when people don't fight back. And a lot of times people don't. I mean, we've seen it in America now. A lot of universities didn't fight back. The newspapers didn't really fight back. Everybody's cutting deals, right? And so the government's reach gets more and more, and that's really dangerous. Look, I'll tell you how bad it got in Russia. I mean, look, we have law in America still. Trump loses in front of judges that he appointed. That's a good sign, right? But you also have things like he can indict Comey for 8646 in seashells. That's bad. That shouldn't be that shouldn't be able to happen, right? But in Russia, it just got to the point where if the president wants to do something, it gets done. And then all the people who were carrying that out, all the people in the justice system, in the courts and in the investigatory agencies, they said, you know what, if the whole system is bogus, we should at least get paid for this, because we don't get paid extra when the government does it. So they commercialized it. So in Russia, you can just buy a case. You just say, I want to put so-and-so in prison. How much does the whole thing cost from investigation to conviction? And then once you've paid it, you go to the person you brought the case against and said, look, you got a business, it's worth $100 million. Why don't you give it to me? Because I've paid for a case to put you in prison, and that's what they're going to do unless you give me your business. And those are called corporate raids. And it got so bad that they were like billboards all over Moscow for lawyers advertising, if you're in a corporate raid or know someone who's in a corporate raid, like American ambulance chasers, right? And they can't fix anything because once you break the system, even the lawyers don't work. I mean, my job in Russia, normally a lawyer's job is come up with the winning argument. In Russia, your job is to come up with the winning argument that your client can use if he can buy his way out of the case. So if your client can cut a deal to make the criminal case against him stop, then he uses the lawyer's winning argument. But if the client can't cut the deal, or if no deal is being offered, he uses the exact same argument and goes to prison and loses everything. So law doesn't matter. Law's just like a show.
Wow. You studied this country that was slowly transforming, and there are parallels to where we are now. How far along in the process are we? And is there something that we're not doing that we could do to stop it? Something that the people of the then Soviet Union could have done to stop it?
Well, it actually would have been stopped a bit later. As I said, people need to, companies that are currently caving and universities that are currently caving and media outlets that are currently caving need to have the lawsuits and risk their licenses. Because if they don't have the lawsuits now, right, they think they're taking the easy way out and they'll be better later, but it won't. That your rights and freedoms get smaller and smaller and smaller until you lose the ability to strike back. So really, it's about mounting challenges now while the system does still work.
Yeah.
If we had a more active, Congress has kind of rolled over on this one, and they let President Trump take more and more of their rights, but Congress should be fighting back also. I mean, look at what's going on in Iran right now, right? All of this is happening without congressional approval, and the country doesn't want it.
When you left Russia, did you come back to the United States?
No, I went back to, I actually ended up in England. I went to England for two reasons, because some of my Russian lawyers could get to England and couldn't get to the United States. And also England became the war room. My client, Bill Browder, and the Hermitage Fund, who were leading this effort to strike back against the people who killed Sergei, they were based in London. So I needed to be based in London to fight the fight with them. And also, we were still, believe it or not, operating a law firm in Russia even after they killed Sergei. And it's just easier to do that when you're on a 3-hour time difference and not an 8-hour time difference like New York.
I was worried that you went back to the United States and decided to join organized crime, and use all the knowledge you gained in Russia to advance. I'm glad to hear that you moved to London. Jameson, this book of yours, if it's half as interesting as you are talking about it, it is going to be amazing. Again, folks, the book is called Rule of Lies, My Wild Ride Through Chaos, Corruption, and Murder in Putin's Russia. I feel like there's so much more we could have talked about. Would you, especially with your take on what's going on in Russia, would you come back another time if we ask you very nicely?
Yeah, of course, of course, of course.
Thank
My
you
pleasure.
so much. Jameson Firestone is the author. We're going to be right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I'm very happy to welcome back to our airwaves infectious disease doctor, Dr. Stockton Mayer. How have you been?
Good. How are you, Joan?
Well, I'm a little toasty, but other than that, I've been reasonably healthy. But I will tell you, last week on the radio,
yes,
I said the phrase explosive diarrhea more last week than I have said it in my entire life. And my daughter and I got a case of norovirus once, so I know what I'm talking about here.
I know what you're talking about.
You know, I was reading an interesting article that talked about how these cyclospora parasites, how, because people are like, well, it sounds just like the norovirus, that's the beautiful illness that you oftentimes seem to pick up on cruise ships or in ports. And it wreaks havoc with your insides. But norovirus is a virus, and it has a tendency to run its course. It starts, there's a middle, there's an end, and it's done. The cyclospora parasite doesn't work that way. Explain the difference, if you would.
Well, I think that you rightly pointed out there are a number of different causes of diarrhea. And I think the more common causes of diarrhea include things like viruses, like you mentioned. We have bacteria, which are another kind of broad class of organisms that can cause diarrhea. And then there are intestinal parasites that can also cause diarrhea, and cyclospora being one of them.
My understanding is, though, that it doesn't just start, work through, and it's over. I've read that it can keep coming back.
Well, I think that it's variable. For some people, it can be an asymptomatic infection. For some people, it can be a relatively short-lived diarrheal illness. And for other people, it can last a bit longer than a week. Can even progress even to 3 weeks and longer. It really kind of depends on the individual. Cyclosporiasis can be particularly harmful for those that are immunocompromised. And, we see folks sometimes with really progressed disease or a really hard to kick disease, and people that have had solid organ transplants, and people that have experiencing advanced HIV. And so in those people and in other people that are maybe on medications to lower their immune system, cyclosporiasis can hang on for a while.
Is there a treatment? And if so, what is it?
There is. There's a common antibacterial called Bactrim that is the preferred treatment for cyclosporiasis. Seems to be fairly effective, and it's a nice intervention to be able to deploy if someone is diagnosed.
Speaking of diagnosing, that's the other thing that I've read about this, because the symptoms are sort of, there's no smoking gun symptom. You go to the doctor and you go, I've really been having a lot of diarrhea lately. Okay.
You got it.
So how do you know when to ask the doctor? I don't even know what kind of test you get. What, a blood test or a stool test or something?
It's generally a stool test. And I think that, you're absolutely right. So symptoms of cyclosporiasis can really mimic a lot of different causes of diarrhea. And to really get to the bottom of it, you need to do some advanced testing. Now, when do you need to see the doctor? For most people, an infection with cyclosporiasis is probably going to be asymptomatic, minimally symptomatic, and resolve maybe within a matter of days. And so a lot of people may not necessarily feel the need to see the doctor. They have diarrhea, which is a very common illness, as you well know. They can manage it at home by eating kind of a bland diet like toast, bananas, etc. Staying hydrated with water, Gatorade, or Pedialyte, something to that effect. And then it goes away. And so there really isn't a whole lot of need to see the doctor. But as we talked about, some people have infections that last a little bit longer, and it can be awful distressing. Diarrhea is very distressing. And so they can visit their provider and start to ask questions about, should I be tested? And the provider is really the one that will kind of help guide whether or not someone needs to be tested. And there are a couple of different tests. You can do a stool test and look for the parasite itself under a microscope. There's another test that looks for like the gene makeup of the parasite, which tends to be a little bit more sensitive. And that's a common one. So it really kind of depends on, what the conversations you have with your doctor, what testing your doctor has available, and, what they decide to order.
Talking to you, from everything I've read, I got the impression that if you get this, man, you are down for the count and it's awful and you're all dehydrated and that it was very serious. But correct me if I'm wrong, you made it sound like there are sort of different degrees of illness here.
That's correct. And I think that that's the case for a lot of different infections. Everyone's a little bit different. They take different medications, have different immune systems, maybe have a different exposure history. It may be that some people already exposed to cyclosporiasis at low levels have some degree of immunity. So all those things really impact the clinical manifestations of the disease and how sick people get. I'm not surprised that some people get pretty sick with some pretty severe diarrhea. That doesn't really surprise me. But I think there may be quite a few cases that aren't really reported because the symptoms aren't really all that severe.
But if you have a case that you don't report to your doctor because the symptoms aren't that severe, could you get better and then a few weeks later it comes back again? That's one of the things that I also read. It was like, oh my God, it's a terrible disease and you think you get better. And then a few weeks later, you're down for the count again.
It can have waxing and waning symptoms. But I think that the majority of people will probably improve, I think, without intervention alone. And again, if you do have those waxing and waning symptoms, it makes sense. If you have a chronic diarrhea, it makes sense to go see a provider and have an evaluation. And I would recommend, talking to the provider about it and getting a stool test so they can find exactly what's going on, because not all antibiotics work for the same things.
With the diarrhea that comes with this, is the thing that is most dangerous the dehydration?
Yeah, I think that's about right. For this particular illness, yes, it tends to cause a non-invasive diarrhea, meaning it doesn't typically cause very high fevers and real inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract or significant inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract. So dehydration is probably the biggest factor that folks need to be worried about.
Interesting. And how do you know when you need to go to the doctor or go to the ER because of your severe dehydration?
Well, let's talk about who's maybe at the greatest risk for severe dehydration from some of this stuff. People that are kind of at the spectrums of life, so the very young or maybe the very old, those can be at greater risk. As we talked about earlier, people with immunocompromising conditions or people that are on medications that lower their immune system, they may be at risk. So a lot of folks may know that if they get a case of diarrhea, they should probably see their provider sooner than later. And they've probably already had these conversations with their provider about if they get sick, when to seek care. And I think that following those directions is really important. Otherwise, if people are, again, the symptoms of dehydration, if you're a parent observing a child, you want to look for kids that maybe are lethargic, maybe aren't acting themselves, that just don't seem as with it as they normally would be. For older adults, it can be very similar, but maybe have some dizziness with standing up, their blood pressure dropping very low. Those are all symptoms that maybe someone's getting more profoundly affected and they need to seek care sooner than later.
Is it true that as you get older, you don't get as thirsty as you are? You don't know when you need to have water?
That's a really good question. A lot of things, as you probably know, change as you get older. And I think that how we respond to infections and dehydration, some of those signals maybe aren't necessarily as robust as they were when we were younger. So, and that counts for a lot of different things. Some folks, as they get older, they won't necessarily mount the same febrile response as they would as they were younger. Sometimes the presentation, the way that they present when they get sick is really just not acting themselves, as opposed to maybe some of the more typical things that you would see in younger folks.
On the interwebs, I saw an advertisement that's something you're supposed to buy for your elderly family members. And it's like this little plastic thing that sits on a table. And when it lights up, it's supposed to remind you to go take a drink of water, because otherwise you might not remember. So I don't need one of those, is what you're saying?
It's so important to stay hydrated. It's so important to drink your water. I mean, I think that is an important take-home point, and I think that device is kind of getting to the point. I think sometimes in older folks that maybe take a lot of medications, constipation can be a big issue, and dehydration can certainly, or not getting enough water can prompt those symptoms or those feelings, and particularly when you get dehydrated, drinking water and drinking fluids is really important.
We need to take a break. I have so many more questions I want to ask you. I'm talking to Dr. Stockton Mayer, infectious disease specialist at the University of Illinois. We will be right back after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
You may have seen the maps of the United States. There's the dark blue, there's the light blue, there's the white. And it is states that have cases of this cyclospora parasite. Illinois, by the way, is light blue, in case you want to know. So, yeah, it's here, but it's not running rampant. You know, I should have started with this, Dr. Mayer. How do you acquire the parasite?
It's usually acquired largely by eating contaminated food or drinking contaminated water. And by contaminated, I mean usually contaminated with feces. This is an organism that lives within human beings, and sometimes waste can contaminate crops or water sources, and those can provoke an infection in humans that have contact with that water or those food products.
Okay. There was first news that there had been some lettuce from Taylor Farms that had been tested, and they were found to have the parasite. And now all of a sudden today I'm reading, oh, wait, that was a false positive. First of all, how do you get a false positive? Was something else throws the test off?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure exactly how that test reported false positive. I don't think that was necessarily released to the media. But either way, they had a false positive test. However, I think that there was enough epidemiologic evidence to point to that specific source. They still consider that the primary source for this outbreak across several states.
I've also read that food that has nooks and crannies, like raspberries, are I read, literally it said food with nooks and crannies are the ones that you most have to worry about, like raspberries. Is that your experience?
I think that, a lot of that is looking back at past outbreaks and what they've been associated with. And, as you pointed out, raspberries have been associated with past outbreaks, spinach, cilantro. I don't necessarily think of those leafy vegetables as maybe having nooks and crannies in the same way that raspberries do. But I think it just kind of highlights the variability maybe in crops that are exposed to this organism that can cause outbreaks.
With E. coli, I've always read that if you just wash your produce thoroughly enough, even if it is contaminated, it will be fine. But from what I've read about this, it's like, oh, no, you can't. No, you can wash it and maybe you'll cut down the amount, but no, you can't get rid of it that way.
Yes, us health professionals have been encouraging folks to really kind of wash their vegetables and help kind of reduce the risk. You may not necessarily get rid of all of the organism, like you mentioned, but you may reduce the burden and maybe decrease the likelihood of getting sick. It's also relatively good practice to make sure your vegetables are clean and washed, and makes it a bit safer to eat.
Are you avoiding lettuce right now?
Oh, absolutely not. I had a big salad today. Yeah, big salad. I mean, listen, here in the state of Illinois, the number of cases are relatively low compared to other states that are experiencing outbreaks right now. And a significant number of our cases, I think it's about half, are related to foreign travel. So I consider, Illinois to be a relatively safe place right now for cyclosporiasis, and I love my fruits and vegetables.
So I threw out two unopened packages of lettuce for no reason.
Well, I guess maybe it depends on where that lettuce came from, Joan.
I suppose. And if you sit down and you go to a friend's house and they serve you a lettuce with raspberries on top, should you question that friendship?
That's really funny. I was in the Peace Corps a long time ago, Joan, and one of my trainers used to tell me, they said, diarrhea is temporary, but trust and friendship last forever.
And finally, it really bothers me. I mean, I understand that you can get a bacterial infection, and I've kind of made my peace with bacteria, but the idea of a parasite, does that mean it's like a little bug that's like crawling around, and once it gets inside of you, it crawls around?
No, not at all. A lot of these are just kind of isolated to the gastrointestinal tract. I'll be honest, and you might not like to hear this, but we're exposed to quite a bit of things in our life. That gastrointestinal tract comes in contact with a lot. It is part of our body that is open to the outside world, believe it or not. And so we see all sorts of stuff.
So a parasite, it's not like you have a little worm inside you.
No, it's not necessarily like you have a little worm, although maybe you do.
If you talked about the GI tract, if you're somebody who's taking an acid suppressant, and because I know stomach acid is really good at cleaning up a lot of this stuff, are you more at risk?
Oh, that's such a good question. Some people are at greater risk for diarrheal illness because of that acid suppressant. It really kind of depends on the individual. It kind of depends on what everything else is going on. But it is important to note, like you mentioned, that acid is kind of a really important line of defense when it comes to illness. So that is valuable. Sometimes in some of us, it can cause some real distress, that stomach acid, but it is there to help protect us in a lot of ways.
I want to go back to dehydration that comes with this infection. You said one of the main symptoms is, like, say, being lightheaded when you stand up. But for somebody like me who tends to have lower blood pressure, I get lightheaded when I stand up every time. So, I know sometimes doctors will like pinch your skin and grab it and let it go and see how quick it takes to refill. Is that a better judge of dehydration?
I would say it's something that folks may see that may have been done a long time ago. I'm not sure we're deploying that physical exam finding all the time. I would say it's very nonspecific in determining whether someone is dehydrated. Something like, blood pressure or symptoms of lightheadedness when standing up, if those are really getting worse or worse than baseline, I think that's probably a more sensitive measure of dehydration and maybe not having enough fluids, particularly if you're older and on multiple medications.
We got a vaccine for COVID. Could there ever be a vaccine for E. coli or the Cyclospora parasite or any of these other things?
Whoa, that's a good point, because there actually is a vaccine for a very common cause of diarrhea, and that's called the rotavirus vaccine. Rotavirus is a very common cause of pediatric diarrhea and can cause severe death, particularly in developing countries in young kids. So that is an example of a vaccine to help prevent diarrhea. There's also a cholera vaccine that can help prevent severe cholera and that kind of illness. There is not yet a cyclosporiasis or a vaccine against cyclospora. I think that when we think of cyclospora, we think of a persistent infection, but not necessarily a lethal one in some of the ways these other infections can be.
I've never heard of, would you say rotavirus? Is it like norovirus?
It is similar in that it is a virus and that causes severe diarrhea. Norovirus is a virus that is very highly associated with outbreaks, tends to cause quite a bit of vomiting associated with it as well. But very similar in the fact that they're both viral illnesses.
You mentioned that it's rotavirus is a problem with children. most of these things, whenever I've done the stories, people at special risk are, young infants and the elderly. Are older people, should they be worried about this? Should they be asking their doctors for the vaccine?
Well, I think that the important thing to note with a lot of viruses, in a lot of infectious diseases, older individuals can be at risk if they get sick, but also they have a lifetime of kind of contact and immunity that helps protect them. And one of the things that I think really gets in kids' way when it comes to rotavirus is that just kind of lack of prior knowledge of the virus and prior immunity. And so they can get fairly sick with that exposure. And a lot of this due just not being familiar with the virus.
So how would you, as one of the listeners out there today, how would you make any changes in your life to protect you from this newest delightful little parasite? Or would you?
Well, I think particularly here in the state of Illinois, as you've kind of mentioned, there's been a specific kind of source of lettuce that I think has been identified by the FDA and the CDC. And certainly, if I would avoid lettuce and restaurants that are sourcing from that space, and I think most people are aware of that. And any restaurants involved, I think, are kind of taking measures to really avoid stocking products with that lettuce. So I think that's maybe the first step to take. If you have an immunocompromising condition, for example, people that are, maybe recovering from a bone marrow transplant or receive chemotherapy and have low white blood cells, they probably already had conversations with their physician about what foods to eat and what not to eat, or whether to cook their vegetables, which is a good strategy. So I would, follow the directions they've already received from their physician. Otherwise, healthy people without really any other medical comorbidities, besides kind of avoiding these sources, I think they need to feel fairly comfortable in eating their fruits and vegetables. I think that, one of the things that we need to be very careful of is food safety and food health is something that we take very seriously in this country, and it's a luxury that we have. And the majority of our fruits and vegetables are very safe for consumption, and they're also very important for our health long term. So I think for the most part, people need to stay eating their fruits and vegetables. It's not an excuse to go out and buy like 10 pizzas for this coming week. I think we really need to be mindful of how important that is to our diet and overall health.
I know that the Cyclospora has been found affiliated with one particular farm, but isn't it naive to think, with this being something that is being experienced across the entire country, isn't it a little naive to think that there's just one farm responsible for it?
Absolutely. And Cyclosporiasis has been around for a long, long time, and it comes from all different places, and it's a seasonal diarrheal illness. We see it kind of spike this time pretty much every year. So it does come from different sources. It has caused disease in the past and will continue to cause disease. Every time we get a spike like this, it's just important to kind of keep an eye out for it and lower risk for the population as a whole. And I think that's what folks are doing.
So if I decide to have a salad, if I pair that with a martini, wouldn't I be disinfecting the salad as it travels?
I don't think that's how it works. But if you like a martini, go for it.
So that alcohol isn't gonna, that isn't gonna.
I don't think that's gonna help.
Okay. Well, I have been avoiding many things since this outbreak was first reported. But based on this discussion that I've had with you, I'm going to be perhaps a little less crazy about what I eat. And so help me God, if I come down with this, I'm going to be calling your cell phone every hour on the hour. Every time I go to the bathroom, I will be calling you so you can share the experience with me.
Thank you, Joan. That's very kind of you.
You're very welcome. Anything else that we need to worry about right now? Anything else that's going to attack our GI system?
Oh boy, I hope not. We're in we've got a few more weeks of summer left. I think it's important to get out and enjoy being in the water, enjoy the summer fruits. I think it's still safe to do that, and I think that and we all should.
That reminds me, with summer potentially coming to an end very shortly, I was always so proud of myself because I got my flu shot like the minute I got notified that the pharmacy had them. And then I was reading, oh no, you should wait. You should wait till October to get your flu shot because that way, it's going to last longer through the winter. What is the right guidance?
That's really that's a really good point, and I think that number one, you rightly pointed out, it's important to get your flu shot no matter what. And I think it is also kind of important to note that flu season generally kind of peaks in the December, January, and February months. And so being aware of when we start to see flu cases can be really helpful about, kind of when you may or may not need to get your vaccine.
So if I get it in August, it will be less effective come December, January than if I get it in October?
Well, there is some evidence to kind of support that, particularly with older folks. But again, you don't really want to postpone getting your flu vaccine because flu season, we do start to see cases November, December, and January and February. So I think what I would say is it is okay to postpone your vaccine until the fall, but don't wait too long because flu season is right around the corner.
For the last couple of years, too, every time I've gone for my flu shot, there has been a new COVID shot available. And it sort of felt like maybe that was going to be the new normal, getting both of them. Do you think that'll be the case this fall?
I think so. I'm still waiting to hear more about what vaccines we'll have in the available in the fall, but I anticipate another COVID shot.
Thank you so much for being here and answering all of my questions. I really appreciate it. Dr. Stockton Mayer is an infectious disease specialist who works at the University of Illinois, and I have his cell number. And if any of you, are taking our advice and you go out and eat a salad and you're in trouble, get in touch with me. Get in touch with me.
Oh, don't do that.
Thank you so much for being here.
Take care.
We're going to take a break for news, and we'll be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Political science professor Brian Endless from Loyola is here today. And Brian, I hope you're having a good day. I didn't think we'd be talking about uptick in the war in Iran. But first of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you, Joan. I'm no longer breathing orange or red air. It looks a little nicer this week.
But they say it's coming back.
Oh,
yeah, I read this morning that because I check the I have the Environmental Protection Agency app on my phone, and I check it multiple times a day, and today is unhealthy for sensitive groups, and I'm very sensitive. Tomorrow. Yep. The air quality will be moderate, and Wednesday the air quality will be moderate. But I have, from everything I've read, the smoke will be getting in our eyes by the end of the week again. Yeah. I couldn't believe that day it was really bad. I walked outside and it was like there was a thick fog. That's how white everything was.
It was incredible. I mean, the day we hit 500 air quality, I use IQ Air, by the way, which is supposedly one of the best. I'm not a meteorologist or anything, but just for your listeners, if they want some comparison points. But 500 is, surface of Venus in terms of air quality. Might not quite be as hot, but it's horrific. And there were some places that got up to 800, which is off the scale. Detroit was 800 over the weekend. It's just
I don't know how the two gauges compare, but the day it was really, really bad, I was watching it, and it was the graph was going up all day long. It started at 500, 600, then it was 800, and the last time I looked, it was like 960.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It was absolutely insane. No, I coached softball on the side, and we just got lucky. We didn't have a game until Saturday night, so it was down to only about 120 or 130 when we were playing. But they were canceling sporting events, canceling pro sports. It was literally, I went outside with a KN95 at one point, and it was okay, but you needed a gas mask by the peak day.
Yeah.
Welcome to global warming, by the way, to climate change.
Yes, extreme weather. And if one more person says, "Oh, it's warm, so there can't be any kind of climate change," no, it's extreme weather. I mean, over the last few years, the number of hurricanes, the severity of the hurricanes, it didn't used to be like this. It really didn't. There was always once in a great while there would be something out of the ordinary, but this is like the new normal.
Yeah, we've been getting dozens of once-in-a-100-year hurricanes along the Florida coast now every year, and those are just the big ones. The numbers are going up. And then you look at these current wildfires, for instance, and I know Trump and a number of others are saying, oh, it's because Canada didn't do the right things in forestry and didn't cut down breaks. Well, you know what? That's a little bit of the cause of it. Yes, there's a little bit of blame to go there, and Canada admits that. The real thing, though, is 100 years of pollution has changed the climate to the point that everything is drier up in Canada and on the west coast of the U.S., and that leads to more thunderstorms, which leads to more lightning, goes into the trees. Trees are dry, trees start on fire, huge amount of wilderness up there. And then to make it worse, it doesn't stay there because the climate's also pushing the air down from the Arctic, and that's happening all year long now. So we get the Arctic air being pushed down, which means all the smoke. It's just terrible.
Yeah. It is awful. And I'm sure you've seen this morning that Donald Trump now decided that Canada should pay for the smoke that's coming to the United States.
Oh, yeah, tariffs.
Yeah.
No, we're going to have more tariffs against them for the smoke.
Yeah, smoke tariffs. Hey, I do want to talk to about some of the real important stuff happening today.
Absolutely.
But I thought this was really interesting. First of all, Lindsey Graham dies. His Donald Trump kind of puts the governor in a corner by saying, I really think his sister, he loved his sister. He loved his sister. I think she should be appointed to serve out the rest of his term. And as you and I know, getting a jump start like that is a real boost for a candidate who really wants to take the seat. So he took that away from the governor. Now, in today's New York Times, Lindsey Graham's sister, Darlene Graham, says she's going to run to succeed him. She doesn't, according to she doesn't appear to have previous political experience, but she does have President Trump's endorsement.
Yep. This is the equivalent, and we've seen this in a number of places. They're looking at the dynasty and whether someone's wife ends up running for office or now sister. I don't know that we've ever had a sister before who steps in to fill a term. It's, we still really, even though we threw off that king, we still look at dynastic politics and say, oh, it's a relative and they must be just like that person and they must have picked up some experience along the way. And it's absolutely ridiculous.
There have been a lot of jokes about this. People posting, well, my brother's a brain surgeon. If anything happens to him, maybe I'll just step into the operating room. And all these other instances where it's obviously so absurd for a family member with no experience to somehow get handed a job like this.
Yeah. No, it's one of those, what's she legitimately going to do other than what people tell her to do? And, she's in with the crowd that's going to tell her exactly how to vote. And maybe she says something on the floor, maybe she doesn't. They tell her exactly what to say. And she could be a fantastic person. We just don't know because there was absolutely no vetting and she has no experience at this.
Well, with the current Senate we have now, let's see, Mark Wayne Mullen, he owned a plumbing business. There's a number of people who you wouldn't have thought would have the resume, shall we say, to be elected to the Senate. So I don't know. Obviously, Donald Trump likes her. Maybe she has said, you're the god, and whatever you want, get behind me for this job, and I will make sure I vote with you 100% of the time, because it's all about him.
Donald Trump's in that line of people elected with zero experience too, so he's perfectly fine with that as it goes down. And to be fair too, I'm not opposed to the citizen legislator and somebody stepping in, but there's a process that we should at least go through where the voters get to know the person before they're just crowned in the office.
Do you think that there will be any Republican that will dare to challenge her since she has gotten the nod from Donald Trump?
I can't imagine that there will be, and there'd be a lot of money, and Trump would come out against that person. And as long as he stays in her corner, that's a state where she's just going to win. And this is his strength right now. He may not be able to do anything constructive. He may not have any ideas that make sense, but he can get Republicans elected in their own primaries. Doesn't mean he's going to get all Republicans elected in general elections, but he has significant control in Republican primaries, at least in MAGA areas.
I'm speaking with political science professor Brian Endless from Loyola University. We are going to take a break and be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am joined by political science professor Brian Endless from Loyola University. I do want to talk about, you mentioned, that maybe putting a Lindsey Graham's sister in the Senate is one of the few things he can still do. He seems utterly at sea with how to bring this conflict with Iran to any kind of a conclusion at all. I really don't think he has. First of all, I don't think he spends a lot of time thinking about it. Not when there are arches to build and,
right.
And ballrooms to build and golf courses to rehab. But it seems to me that we are in a dangerous position because he seems to be more and more untethered and erratic and impulsive. And I don't know that there's anybody in the White House who can rein him in. And there's a lot of people who were worried over the weekend that Trump might drop a nuclear bomb or try to on Iran when he was talking about, how he was going to, destroy them.
Yep. Yeah, so a couple of things, Joan. First, I agree with you completely, except for one minor thing. I think there's a little bit of evidence, and I think we can hope that this is the thing that he worries about, that this is something that at the very least ticks him off, that people aren't doing what he tells them to do, and he is constantly trying to think of ways to fix it. And the problem is he can't fix it, and that's because no one's going to fix this. The answer was don't invade in the first place. And every American administration since the early 1990s has been asked by Israel to go in and attack Iran, and everybody's been smart up until this point in time because it's a no-win scenario for exactly the reasons that we're seeing: control of oil, ability to strike back at neighbors that we support, and then most importantly, the Straits of Hormuz. There's just no way to win. If I was going to give Donald Trump advice right now, and I think the first time you and I talked about Iran, I gave this advice. It is time to declare victory and leave. And it's been time to declare victory and leave since day 2 of the war. That's the only way out of this, and not much is going to change except more people being killed and more money going down the drain.
We kind of tried to do that. Donald Trump kind of tried to do that. Remember when there was the memo of understanding and the ceasefire, and then Iran kept attacking U.S. air bases and other Middle Eastern countries, and Donald Trump was like, no, we have a ceasefire. It's right. A ceasefire. It's still a ceasefire. And I don't know, maybe Iran, didn't push the matter too hard, too far. But I don't think he can do that. At this point in time, if he says we've won and walks away, I think that the Republicans, major media outlets are going to say, dude, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, I think that's likely. I also think it's the least bad option. That's where he's put himself on this. He can continue this, and it's just going to suck everything down the drain if he does. The ceasefires are a great example. First, it's just kind of what ceasefires in the Middle East look like, unfortunately. There are a lot of munitions that cross borders when quote-unquote ceasefires happen between Israel and Arab states and in other conflicts in the Middle East. Second, Iran always wanted to link this to Israel attacking into Lebanon, and the U.S. hasn't officially linked that. And in the last quote-unquote ceasefire, Trump made a call to Netanyahu to try to call him off, but now there's still some things going on. And then the other one we know in the last couple weeks is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the people who are in charge of the military, don't really have an interest in this ending right now, that they're seeing benefits in keeping the war going and in their prestige and in their contacts in keeping the war going and their ability to control inside the country. And there's no real apparent Iranian leadership above them. Usually that would be the Ayatollah. But in this case, this is the son of the previous Ayatollah, and he hasn't been seen since the bombing attack that killed his dad and injured him.
What do you think the reason for that is?
We just don't know. I'm guessing he is still alive, and somebody
is he pulling a Mitch McConnell?
Puppet. He might be, yeah, in Weekend at Bernie's, absolutely. It's entirely possible. If I had to guess, I would make a tiny bet on him being in Russia in treatment right now for, people have said he had burns all over his body after the attack. There's a chance he's in Iran. He was not visible during the state funeral, the official funeral for his father and others, and people keep talking about him and invoking his name. So, yeah, he could be alive and out of the picture. He could be dead. It's incredibly unlikely that he's actually asserting any authority right now, though.
So how do you see it truly? How do you see this ending, especially now that we're starting to see U.S. casualties, which of course Donald Trump wants to solely lay at the feet of Iran, and every casualty seems to be an increase in his rhetoric, if not in his violence.
Yeah, absolutely. And good news, bad news. We've had 17 U.S. service members killed. That's good news because it could be enormously more. So the fact that it's 17 and I think it's like 400, 450 wounded is a low number compared to what it could be. And I do want to point out, too, that the Iranians have had over 8,000 people killed. So there are a lot of human beings who are dying here. You take the service members just killed in the last week. 2 were killed in a Iranian bombing in Jordan, and one was actually killed off the battlefield. Sounds like there was a drone that had landed without exploding, and this person wasn't even trying to disarm the drone. He was just in the area when it went off, and he was killed and a number injured. And sure, Trump's going to use those, but it's not the kind of thing that's going to it's going to convince people that we should be going to war. I'm hopeful that the longer this thing lasts, the more Congress gets unwilling to fund it, if nothing else, because it's going to hopefully hurt Republicans' numbers in the midterms. And that's something that the Democrats can run on. Not as important as affordability and domestic issues, but it's still one of those things that's out there, and the huge cost of it is what the Democrats will bring up. What else could we use that money for is an incredibly legitimate question that's out there.
Well, it's interesting.
Go
I was just going to say, it's interesting that you say that. One of the headlines in the New York Times right now, as Trump sidelines Congress, GOP is boxed in on Iran war.
Yeah, the boxed in part is if you come out against Trump, he will primary you, and getting right back to the beginning of the show. And that's where all of his power comes from. One of the things is there's going to be a pretty big question at the end of this year in terms of how the elections turn out. And does the fact that Trump defeated some people in primaries end up costing the Republicans more seats? And if we see that happening, we could very well see some revolt there. but it's still very hard because you've got all the Congress people are up again in 2 years, and Trump will absolutely be a lame duck unless somebody revives talk of a third term, but that seems to have gone by the wayside at least. But he'll be a lame duck, and he'll be looking to throw power around, and wherever he can find it, and that will be the place that it is, and helping his allies win primaries, and then a third of the Senate is up at that point too. So that's going to be a factor that hangs out there for a while.
Over the weekend, I read that once we have restarted our serious attacks on Iran, not only did we go after some bridges, but apparently we went after a water plant. I think that's getting real close to war crime territory. Because, a bridge, maybe you could argue, the military munitions are being carried across the bridge, but a water plant? That's a little tougher.
As someone who studies and testifies in court on war crimes, Joan, I can tell you flat out that those are war crimes according to the Geneva Conventions on war crimes. If it's a bridge or a water plant, the only way that infrastructure is not a war crime if it is infrastructure that is primarily used by the military. So a bridge coming out of a military base is probably bombable. A water plant on a military base is bombable. But these are not that situation. These are in public areas. You can read deep into the New York Times and deep into the AP reports and see where they are and get the locations. We're not bombing military targets. We're bombing civilian targets. And from the minute they announced they might do this, the U.S. administration was committing war crimes.
Was Pete Hegseth committing a war crime when shortly after the war with Iran started, he said that there are no rules. When it comes to war, there are no rules. Everything is on the table because, we're men and we don't follow any rules. We fight to win. It sort of seemed like at that point in time, it was just a matter of time before we started committing war crimes.
That is not specifically a war crime in and of itself, except that leaders are not supposed to create the circumstances that make it seem to normal soldiers as if it's okay to commit war crimes. So that would certainly come up. I doubt any of these people are ever going to face a war crimes tribunal, but that could certainly come up. The more important thing, though, is in every one of those speeches Hegseth has given, he's gone on and talked about the war crimes he wants people to commit right after that. So whether it's the bombings, whether it's the various different actions, whether it's refusing to take any responsibility for the school that was hit in the first days, and everything forward since that point in time. Attacking oil plants is a very similar thing. Oil refineries is a similar thing. Those all fall into the category of war crimes, and both he and Donald Trump have announced over and over again that we're going to do them and that we have done them.
Brian, I didn't realize that you had given testimony when it comes to war crimes. Was that at The Hague?
It was not, actually. I've done it locally in the U.S. and then in a couple other countries, Canada, Britain, and the Netherlands. I've been an expert witness in a number of different refugee asylum seeker cases, and most of them are just citizenship where this doesn't come up. But in 5 different cases, I've testified for people who I felt were falsely accused of genocide and war crimes in Rwanda and in the Congo. And these were people who were going to have their U.S. or Canadian or British or Dutch citizenship taken away if they were prosecuted. So the Rwandan Congolese governments, Rwandan government primarily, had been putting out false information about them. And I'm basically testifying on, what the situation in 1994 and since then in Rwanda has looked like, what the war crimes in Congo right now look like, and they're horrific situations.
We need to take a break, but Brian, I'd love to talk to you more about this. It's an area that, we hear it all the time, a phrase we hear thrown around, but what it actually means and what the consequences really will be. I think a lot of people are fuzzy on. We're going to take a break. Professor Brian Endless will be back with us right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Political science professor Brian Endless from Loyola University has an area of expertise that I was not aware of, which is what constitutes a war crime. And is there a one hard and fast definition? I also want to get a definition of genocide because, you know, with Gaza, that's a word that keeps getting thrown around. And some people react like, oh, you know, you're being hysterical by calling it that. So let's start with war crimes. Is there a hard and fast definition, like say maybe a definition that's used by the United Nations?
There is, but it's incredibly long. So there are multiple Geneva Conventions, first one in the 1800s, going into the 1900s, that deal with laws of war. And then you can also add the UN Charter and the International Criminal Court and others to that. There are some things that pretty much always fall into the category of war crimes, and many, many things that are questionable, that could be, that depend on the circumstances and things that are happening. The one that is close but not quite inviolate, that happens all the time, frankly, is the killing of civilians when they didn't have to be killed. And this is a significant one because big powers starting in World War II needed an excuse to kill civilians when we do things like bomb munitions plants and kill people in the neighborhood. And when the Israelis, for instance, go into Gaza and take out a building because there is a quote unquote terrorist inside of the building. Just because they say they're collateral damage does not make those things legal. It is a war crime to kill civilians. Very few exceptions to that. If there's really a civilian who is just accidentally in the way, that is a different story. But arguably that doesn't happen very often. Beyond that, there's all sorts of actions that can be war crimes, and there are solid definitions. It's just, you know, tens and hundreds of thousands of words in multiple big treaties.
So let's talk about genocide and what it means. Is it one of those words that has a different definition depending upon who's using it?
So genocide is, you can talk about it in two ways. One is that there is a legal definition, and one is that there is a political definition. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the time that we hear the word thrown around, it is a political definition. It is basically, in the eyes of the observer, in the eyes of whoever is talking to you, what is genocide, what is not genocide. So, you know, classic example right now, the Israeli government talks about the idea that Israel was created as a Jewish state because of the Holocaust, which was one of the first recognized genocides. The word genocide was coined to refer to the Holocaust, and Israel is absolutely right that the state was created because of that and at that point in time. But they then go on to say that people who have been victims of genocide cannot possibly commit genocide. And that's just prima facie false. And it doesn't matter what you are a victim of, you can commit the same damn crime.
Yeah, I mean, I could be the victim of a robbery and turn around and rob you. It doesn't mean like, oh my God, I can't be convicted of robbery because I was robbed.
Exactly. So the definition of genocide, though, is incredibly important. There is a convention on genocide that has the primary definition, and I'll give it to you real quick just because it is that important to the discussion. Genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, that is important, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, and this can include killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And in terms of the Palestinians, with the exception of the fifth one, these are all actions that have happened. When we look at Ukraine imposing measures to prevent births, or actually transferring children is the biggest one in Ukraine, with Russians transferring children. Once you get past that, though, so these four things at least: killing members of the group, serious bodily harm, preventing births, these have all happened. The question then becomes, is there an intent to destroy in whole or in part? And this gets to the mental aspect of it. So it's kind of like in U.S. law, the intent to commit murder. Is it accidental? It becomes a different crime. If there's intent, it becomes murder. The same thing's true with genocide. You can kill hundreds of thousands of people, and if you didn't have the intent to wipe out a group, it's not genocide. It's just quote unquote mass murder, and probably a lot of war crimes along the way. But then it would not be genocide. So at the beginning of this conflict in Gaza, I think I was one of the few people out there that was holding my my informed opinion about it, because I originally had trouble seeing the intent of the Israeli leadership. Intent has to be the people giving the orders. So the people in the cabinet, the prime minister, the military leaders, they need to be saying things that show intent. And it took a while because the Israelis weren't using those words, which is also standard for leaders in this situation. But once we got 6 months into that war, we started to see Israeli leaders talking about wiping out all of the people in Gaza, and talking about creating conditions on the ground so that people could not live in Gaza. And there are a number of different groups that actually keep track of statements like this. Most of those, by the way, are Israeli-based human rights groups, Jewish human rights groups in Israel, keep track, and they've gone through all of those statements that are out there. South Africa and a number of other countries asked the International Court of Justice to rule on whether this is a genocide and put together a briefing with an enormous amount of evidence. So I'm going to say, very sadly, the evidence is out there to say that there's plenty to take a number of Israeli leaders to trial for genocide. Doesn't mean the Israeli people committed genocide. It means specific leaders have committed genocide.
I also want to talk to you about war crimes, because the International Criminal Court has said that Benjamin Netanyahu is guilty of war crimes. Zoran Mamdani, it was reported today in the New York Times, has met with some of the top leaders in New York City to find out whether or not they could or should arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he comes to New York, which he is scheduled to do in September to address the United Nations. Donald Trump has said very emphatically Netanyahu is not going to be arrested here. And my understanding is that there might be sort of a loophole because we didn't sign the same agreement to basically respect the International Criminal Court. Is that correct?
The loophole is actually completely different. So we didn't ratify the International Criminal Court Agreement, which means that on our soil, it does not apply to us. That doesn't mean that our government, federal government, couldn't decide to send people to the International Criminal Court for prosecution. We've done that through the Security Council, for instance. We voted to send people from other countries to the ICC. But that is strictly legally a decision of the executive, a decision of the president. I read the exact same article about Zoran, and honestly, he can call me and the advice will take seconds to give him. He has absolutely no standing to arrest a foreign leader for anything. Zoran can have a bunch of parking tickets built up in New York. He can actually literally murder someone in New York, and the city of New York has no right to arrest him. That immediately goes to the federal government because of his protected diplomatic status. So in this case, I think it's just a lot of words. Has he been indicted at the ICC? He has. Benjamin Netanyahu has certainly been responsible for things that the world views as war crimes. And if he ever goes to a country that has ratified the International Criminal Court, that country is bound to send him to The Hague and so that he can be put on trial. So the places he can travel to are very limited right now, but the U.S. is one of those places he can travel to.
So the fact that Mamdani said, my point is that if someone is charged with a warrant by the International Criminal Court for these kinds of crimes, that's something I believe that should be honored, but he doesn't have the authority to honor it.
Exactly. He is perfectly legitimate in his belief, but he does not have that authority as the mayor.
Okay. All right. It would have been interesting if they'd have tried.
And the other thing is,
go ahead.
Bibi will have Secret Service, and in addition to his Israeli security guards, he's at the level of a prime minister that's going to have Secret Service protection. The Secret Service won't allow the New York police to arrest him.
Okie dokie. If there's an embassy in this country, the ground that embassy sits on is their ground. The Russian embassy in Washington, where it is located, that soil is considered Russian soil. Is the United Nations considered U.S. soil, or is it off limits because it is representing a whole world full of countries?
Sure. So two things. First, every country in the UN has a UN mission in New York that is their soil. So there's an Israel House, for instance, where that is Israeli soil, a consulate, basically. The UN, though, the original agreement, the Rockefeller family donated the land that the UN is on, and there's something called the host country agreement with the United States. And that host country agreement says that UN territory is international property, is international territory. So it belongs to no country. Now, by tradition, if someone breaks a law on UN grounds, UN security can make the decision, and usually does make the decision, to walk them out the gates and hand them to the New York police. So, if someone steals something out of the UN gift shop or something like that, they get walked outside and arrested.
Interesting. I'm speaking with political science professor Brian Endless from Loyola University. We are going to take a break and be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am joined by political science professor Brian Endless from Loyola. Brian, we have spent this hour talking about all the things that seem odd or interesting to me. What are you paying attention to in the news right now?
Besides the orange skies, that's going to be up there for a while for me. I think Trump's speech last week, quote unquote speech, is more important than people think, because he may have sounded unhinged. He may have repeated all the same stuff over and over again, but it's become very clear that he's setting the country up to expect something to go wrong on election night. And that is incredibly scary at the moment. We're in an economy where it looks bad for the Republicans. It's a midterm election, and those are just generically usually bad. We're looking at a lot of polls saying Democrats can take the House and the Senate. And yet we're also looking at enormous voter repression campaigns between gerrymandering, and now the bigger one that he keeps talking about is effectively putting federal troops at polling places in the form of ICE, and potentially having them storm into election commissions and pull out ballot boxes. And this would be absolutely horrific for the American Republic. It would throw us into an enormous spin, and I'm really afraid of where we could end up if that happens. So we need to be incredibly vigilant here. And really, I know Democrats and a lot of nonprofits are starting to try to legislate these things or go to court on these things in advance. But the president has some power, or the president doesn't have some power. The president has some illegitimate power that he could throw around here.
Do you think that the state's attorneys general are preparing, trying to think about every contingency and preparing so that instead of taking 3 days to go to court, they can, when something happens, they can be in court in a matter of hours?
Yeah, the good news is we know they are. This is something that J.B. Pritzker and then governors in, I think it was Colorado and Oregon, Washington, and then California too, joined up in for the last election. And the state's attorneys general are still working together. And I think there are a lot more states that have joined them now where they have put together their legal efforts. And as you just said, is exactly it. They want to be in court minutes after they see something happening and after they see anything that could be illegal happening. And they're going to have a lot of poll watchers out there too and watching for these things to go on. But beyond that, what Trump's really trying to do is put a sense of illegitimacy in our government and in our electoral system into the minds of all Americans. He wants to scare people who are against him, and he wants to scare people who are with him into potentially acting afterwards. And I could very easily see him and his people talking in the background about, what happens? Do we have to do another January 6th, whether it's in 2026, 2027, or whether it's after the 2028 elections? They have taken it violent once. Do they think about taking it violent again? I think we need to seriously consider that. To me, that would be more likely to come from the side that supports Trump as opposed to the other side. But there are some elements popping up on both sides.
Both sides?
Yeah, we see more and more people. I have a lot of liberal friends who, for a number of years now, have been talking about the fact that liberals need to arm themselves and that the potential is out there. And we don't see it a lot. The numbers are still very clearly that most domestic terrorism, most domestic assassinations, including several against officials on the right, have been committed by people on the right politically. But there are a lot of people on the interweb talking about this. And there's a lot of chatter that's going on. And, this what happened January 6th started with that kind of talk on the internet. When people are afraid, we don't know what they're going to do. And I don't want to say this is going to happen. I want to say this is a lot like climate change. We're being set up that something's going to happen, that it's going to be a situation that is ripe for something strange to happen. And I think we need to expect that and take as many precautions as we can. And we need to be ready for it and have our eyes open to things like that speech last week.
This doesn't seem like, let's say Donald Trump deploys ICE. It doesn't seem like the kind of situation where Governor Pritzker would deploy the National Guard. But I think a lot of people are concerned that police officers' sympathies are more for ICE than they are against ICE. There have been cities where even when they say there's a rule passed where local police are not supposed to assist ICE or give them tips, where there have been folks in positions of leadership that said, you can't stop us. We're going to do what we want to do. Do you think if ICE were deployed to polling places, what would be the response? Do we send cops? Do we send the National Guard?
I think it completely depends on the locality. So in Chicago, we seem to have both politicians and police who are at least willing to go out in the streets and not actively support ICE. Personally, I'm someone who's been disappointed all along that police aren't going out in cities where it's feasible and arresting ICE when they commit illegalities, because I think there's been plenty of that going on. And I would suggest that's justified. At the very least, do it and see what the courts say about it and let the courts sort it out afterwards. So we'll have some of that. The purpose, and let's make sure everybody understands, the purpose of putting ICE out on the streets is to have a chilling effect on people going to the polls. It's not necessarily going to do anything physical, but particularly it's going to limit the Hispanic vote. And it may limit the votes of other minority groups, which are largely for the Democratic Party. And that is a lot. That's basically the full reason behind it. I can see this turning into a significant election night issue in some blue areas where it's been made clear by the leadership that they're not going to support ICE and they're going to stand up. Those aren't that many. I can also see plenty of places in other areas, and especially places in rural areas where the sheriffs have all the power, that are not going to send police out or send police out to support ICE in some cases and to hang out with them and to keep people scared when they are there. So I don't think the police is going to take any action. I frankly doubt that ICE takes any physical action, but that's not the point.
But if you're a brown person, even if you're a citizen, but the fact that Brett Kavanaugh basically said to the government thugs that, oh yeah, you can, if somebody's brown, I understand why you don't want to take them into custody. I mean, it just kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
That's an official ruling of the Supreme Court of the United States. This is the most horrific thing I think they've done since Citizens United, and the single most horrific thing.
I don't think anybody ever explained to Brett Kavanaugh what profiling is. My guess is he's never heard of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just one of those things that it's just crystal clear that that is racist, that there's absolutely no question about it at all. And now every Hispanic person, every person who looks Hispanic in the country, regardless of whether you were born here, regardless of your legality in being here, which is the vast majority of people are in the legal system, regardless of that, you have to be afraid that ICE is going to pick you up. And then the way that the courts have been going, they might get you out of the country before you get your day in court, or at the very least, you might be put in what is effectively a concentration camp.
Yeah, it's Trump is like a cornered animal, and he's going to be more and more dangerous as the midterm elections get closer and closer. For some reason, Brian, he keeps talking about, well, if the Democrats win the House, they're going to impeach me again. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, they impeached you twice. It didn't slow you down at all. It did. Right. It didn't rein you in any way, shape, or form. And even if Democrats get a majority, a squeaky majority in the Senate, it's going to be a squeaky majority. So the chances of conviction are, again, very, very low. But he keeps talking about, well, they're going to impeach me. They're going to impeach me. Right. Why is he so obsessed with something that made no difference the first two times?
Well, there are two things going on here. The first is Donald Trump being obsessed with always being right and with never being blamed for anything. And that's there. But I think that the people behind Donald Trump understand that if the Democrats take power, everyone in the Trump administration is going to be spending an enormous time testifying before Congress. And that is going to potentially limit what they can do after the new Congress is seated in January. So there is some real world effect. They're not going to succeed on any of their impeachments. He's just going to give people immunity if they, are actually brought up before anything and any charges are actually brought up. But on the other hand, though, I think that when he talks about citizenship, when he talks about immigrants, that's not just him throwing things out and throwing out smoke. That is a well-conceived plan that has been in the works with, Heritage Foundation and Project 2025 and various people in the administration. And they are going after immigrants for very specific political reasons. They're trying to limit the Democratic voter base. They're trying to scare people, and they're emboldening their MAGA voter base and telling their MAGA voter base that these terrible people are out there and we're taking care of it. There's some hope it could backfire on them. I think we're seeing a little bit of that because it has absolutely gone overboard. But there's much more planning on the immigrant side than there is on things like the Iran war side.
Brian, thank you so much for being here today. Political science professor Brian Endless from Loyola University. This has been terrific. Thanks for sharing your day.
Thank you, Joan. I appreciate it. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, too. That is going to do it for me today. Driving it home with Patty Vasquez is up next. She's going to be joined by Dan Schaefer from the recombobulation area. She's also going to talk to Indiana State Rep Phil Giacinta. And tomorrow on Richard's show, he's going to talk to Anderson Clayton, chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party. Join me tomorrow. I'm going to have Jill Wine-Banks on, and whenever we talk politics, it is a hoot and a half. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great evening. Good night.